Hi, we're moving on to a new section in our course. We are now up time-wise into the American city, and we're moving into the post-World War II era. We're moving into the 60s and 70s, and we're going to hang out in New York for a while as we take a look at Ivor Miller's Creolizing for Survival in the City. This is an article about graffiti. Graffiti. Is graffiti art or is it vandalism? That's one of the questions I'll ask you to consider when you're taking a look at this article, when you're reading it, and when we're going through a series of videos here. I am intentionally making a series of short videos here because Miller has broken his article into several discrete sections. So we're going to try a little different approach this time. So be prepared for that. But it would be great if you could make sure that you've read each of these sections before you come to each of these videos. It'll make more sense. Let's start a little bit by setting the time and space for his study, for his article. As I may have said before, he is going to the places where this art exists. He is interviewing the people who perpetuated this art or this vandalism, depending on how you look at it. And so in that regard, he's got lots of primary sources, which as a historian, you know, I like. So it's an unusual approach to a topic in many ways because he is interviewing people who, again, depending upon your mindset, depending upon your aesthetic, are creating art that is very much a part of the city of New York and what New York is all about, or they're creating a great problem for the city leaders of New York and a nuisance for people who live in the city who don't appreciate this as art. The main points to think about is this is art done with spray paint. So in that regard, you may say, oops, right there, no art for me, I don't like it. This is art done by spray paint, or aerosol art it's called. Again, is this a celebration of the city or is this an attack on the city? It starts in the 1970s, and Miller is going to focus on New York City itself. It starts in the 1970s. 1971, he says, is the earliest. This is the time of the Vietnam War. This is the time of the civil rights movement that is really taking this country by storm, creating chaos in our cities, creating change, concerns for people's rights, concerns for access to education, access to employment, and a great change in how we viewed ourselves as a country, how we viewed our relationships to each other in this country. So this is a very exciting time. And this movement, if we want to call it that, this graffiti movement, is an important part of that. Miller will tell us that the people who do graffiti are called writers. Graffiti is just an Italian word coming from the Latin that means little writing, so small writing. So they're called writers. They're also be called artists, aerosol artists, right? So there's all kinds of terms for these folks. Again, some will call them vandals. That's not for Miller, though. He's going to call them writers or artists. They were 12 to 15 years old, these writers, when they first began. So they're young, right? They're young. He uses the term creolizing in his title. Creolizing, we should explain quickly, is a term that we often used to define some kind of cultural event, some kind of issue in which more than one thing come together, in which more than one concept, one idea come together to create something new. Sort of a fusion of more than one thing, a recipe, if you will. So in the graffiti that Miller is going to examine, he says he can find elements of the artist's own heritage. He says he can find elements of television and culture. The 60s and 70s are a time when television as a medium was taking off for the first time. So a very interesting new technology, right, that's coming to people. Imagine yourself without video technology on a daily basis. Can you imagine that? I mean, I'm sitting here recording a video on a MacBook Pro. You may be watching it on your iPhone. Sorry, I don't mean to just peddle Macintosh and Apple products, but Maybe you're watching it on your television, depending on how you've got it set up. At any rate, can you imagine any of the world we have today without video like stimulation, access for information? This is a time when television, the 70s, 60s and 70s, a time when television became a fixture in the household, and it was brand new. It was a new concept. So he says in Creolization that he sees a coming together of people's own heritage, whether you be African American, Irish, from the Caribbean, that might be Puerto Rico, Haiti, Jamaica, from Europe, whatever it might be, whatever your heritage is. He says he can see in these writers a combination, creolizing, coming together, a recipe, if you will, of their own heritage, popular culture like such as television, and then mass marketing. He sees lots of issues in advertising. Comic books are going to feature. So images coming out of advertising that are vibrant and impressive. And then add to that the social movements, the political and social movements of the 60s. So for Miller, in graffiti, he's going to see in the city art a combination of the artist's or the writer's heritage, television, advertising. And we'll talk more about that. And then the various social movements of the 60s. He also says that this art movement, and again for him it's an art movement, was created spontaneously with no precedence. It is a completely new art form. And that makes it interesting for him as well. So as we said, this happens in the 70s and 80s. It begins in New York, but it goes beyond New York. It goes throughout the country, goes out throughout the world eventually. Both public spaces and private spaces found themselves graffitied. But it was the subway trains in New York that were the most prominent canvases for graffiti, and perhaps the most interesting. Those of us who are in Kansas, live in a region where mass transit is not as popular as it is in, say, New York, because we don't have the population density, to be honest with you. It'd be nice if we had more mass transit. It would help us out a lot with our gasoline and other things. But for now, we don't have a lot of that. And in New York, mass transit is it. It's you're on a train in the morning on your way to work. You're on a train going home. You may be on a train at midday to go meet someone for lunch. If you're going to school, you're on a train or a bus. Excuse me, going to school, going back home, going to work. So this was a common conveyance for people. And a lot of this art, a lot of these images wind up on subway trains in particular, trains that are elevated and go below ground. This is interesting because, trains like this, they don't stay still very long. So this kind of art is art in a hurry, art that is fast. And it also must be known that these artists, these writers, knew that their art would be viewed while it was in motion. And Miller's going to talk to you about how that actually influences the style of art that's done. So that's very interesting. It's dangerous trying to paint trains while they're stopped for a moment, either in a subway or in a train yard or something of that effect, right? So this is a dangerous thing to do. It's illegal, absolutely illegal. And so you have to, again, think, is this art or is this vandalism? Teenagers with spray paint cans doing art, right? Miller will tell you it's a form of communication. He'll tell you it's a form of art. It's a form of cultural identity and expression, and that it's something unique to city living, urban living. And so that's why he finds it worth investigating. So take a look at this article, Ivor Miller, Creolizing for Survival in the City. And then come on to our next video once you get through the first part.